you're not from Toronto and you're visiting for the weekend and you're walking through Chinatown, you might find yourself asking, is that a moose? Then later in the day, you're walking through Midtown and out of the corner of your eye, you see another one and you ask yourself, is that a moose? Then you're rounding out your weekend in Don Mills for some reason and you see another one, and you come to the conclusion that that is indeed a moose. So yeah, there are moose all over the city.
There was mooses everywhere, on top of buildings and parks, people's front lawns.
We were driving and a moose appeared. It's a big day.
The city was going like moose crazy.
And if you grew up in Toronto in the early 2000s, you might remember that there used to be a whole lot more.
Where are they? That's a good question. And where did they go? And we should find them.
Hi, I'm Dylan. This is Not Exactly Normal, and this is the story of the time when over 300 moose took over Toronto. And they were fancy as hell. Okay, so it's 24 years ago. I looked like this, Toronto looked like this, and we were in the midst of a bit of a cultural tug of war with America.
So who's better than Bad Boy? Nobody.
No, like this. Nobody. At Bad Boy, we treat everyone like a king.
Or a president.
The Raptors were in the playoffs for the first time and had just lost to the New York Knicks. The Leafs just lost in round 2 of the playoffs to the New Jersey Devils. And Chicago, a year prior, had unveiled a public art exhibition featuring large statues of decorated cows.
Well, starting next week, you're going to see a lot of cows hanging around Chicago.
But these aren't the kind that you milk. Marcella Raymond is here to tell us about the cows on parade.
These are fiberglass cows, all dressed up and painted real pretty. It's all a ploy to get people to come to Chicago.
The gauntlet was thrown. Toronto had to respond. This is George Cohan. He was the founder and then senior chairman of McDonald's Canada. Here he is opening the world's first McDonald's in Russia in the early 90s.
In this day and age, it's nice when the people can come out and get meat, bread, potatoes, and milk of the highest quality.
And it was his idea to do a Canadian moosified version of Chicago's Cows on Parade.
Now, I don't want to milk this story too much. You're right. You got to check out these cows.
As a side note, Cows on Parade actually originated in Switzerland. And since their copy cow debut in Chicago, they've become part of an international public art exhibition featuring painted cows found in cities all over the world.
The cows are here to boost tourism. Chicago officials got the idea from Zurich, Switzerland, which saw an extra 1.5 million people come see its cows. And boy, do these cows have style.
So when you hear some of the criticisms that the Toronto moose were stolen from Chicago, we actually both stole them from the Swiss. I actually got to meet a couple of the cows at Mont Saint-Michel when I was in France filming for Animalogic a few years ago. At least I'm 99% sure they were part of the Cows Parade exhibit. Otherwise, the French also stole the Swiss's idea for fun painted cows. Cohen brought the moose idea to our then bad boy mayor, Mel Lastman.
Oh, buddy.
I was pretty young when this all happened, so I'll let someone who knew Mayor Lastman describe him to you.
He was very unique, very creative. He was short, but very sharp. He was a visionary. He was the epitome of incredible.
That's Mendl Shwartz.
My name is Josetta Bertowitz, Castino Faciana, Mendlini, Frankie Benetuzzi, but you can call me Joe. No, Mendl Shwartz.
He owns a printing company called Incredible Printing, and he was friends with Mel Lastman. And he was in charge of printing this book, which features every single moose from the Moose in the City project.
What was a moose book? I had no idea. All I knew was when Mel asked for something, we did it.
And next to him is Ian Leventhal. He's an artist, and he painted several of the moose.
My name's Ian Leventhal. I've been an artist in Toronto for decades. I specialize in sculpture, mural installations. The moose one was one of the most outrageous because it was so huge. It just spanned the entire city.
Here's what he had to say about the mayor.
Mel was a real showman. He was sort of like in that realm of the Mervishes, you know? They wanted to put on a show. It was always about that. They gave it a little sort of a Las Vegas edge to it, which was not Toronto. Toronto was pretty dry and pretty staid. It made it fun, and it made it a little crazy, a little silly, a little kooky, and that's why people paid attention to it.
Perhaps there is no better photo to illustrate just how much of a character Mel Lastman was than this one, which they used to announce the Moose in the City project, which features Mel Lastman riding a giant moose with the name tag Mayor's Moose. In that same article, he was quoted as saying, "Today, the greatest city in the world becomes the moose capital of the world." Just amazing. As a side note, I was going to tell you that the concept of putting up moose statues in Toronto in order to lure in tourists by perpetuating the myth that Canada is entirely wild and moose-filled is hilarious, but then I checked the IUCN's range map for the moose, and apparently they go as far south as Ajax, which is in the Greater Toronto area, and in 2021, a real-life wild moose was spotted in a park in Pickering, which is even closer to Toronto. But back to the fake moose. So George Cohan brought the idea to Mel Lastman, and Mel, being the outgoing character that he was, decided that Toronto needed an army of moose statues. Why? You know, like tourism and stuff.
I guess the city and the country needed something that added color and taste.
Based on the success of Chicago and Zurich's Cow Parade, Mel Lastman hoped to bring in over 200 million tourist dollars over the summer while the exhibition was on. Then in October, the moose would be auctioned off for charity to raise money for Team Canada at the Olympics. Not entirely dissimilar from what they did in Chicago.
And following the exhibition, which ends in October, the cows will be auctioned off.
For the auction, the city made a bunch of moose merch, including bucket hats, plushies, and shirts, one of which I was lucky enough to find on eBay. Okay, so my eBay package just arrived. It's a Moose in the City branded collared shirt. I've been trying to get Moose in the City merch for like the better part of the last year while I've been working on this video, but I've had no luck. What I really wanted was the bucket hat, but when this shirt popped up on eBay in hopefully my size, I was really excited and I had to have it. Let's see if it fits. I really hope it does. Oh yeah. Toronto's Outdoor Museum. I absolutely love it. Okay, you can cue up some like sexy saxophone for this sequence if you're interested in such things. Oh yeah. Ooh, I just fully ripped one of the buttons. Oh no, they're all ripping. No, this is super cheap. There we go, one of the buttons. I feel like the saxophone might not help with this sort of awkward dressing sequence. Oh yeah. Hey, nice to moose you. Worth it. But back to the moose. The city supposedly never actually spent any money on the moose, and the moose were paid for at $6,500 each by corporations who could then decorate them to promote their businesses or just to look fun, or a bit of both.
The hardest part about these things was painting underneath, like getting right. Yeah. You have to paint the bellies and the underparts.
Are they anatomically correct under there? But things got off to a rocky start, and almost immediately people started stealing the antlers.
I think the saddest part was the loss of the antlers.
Right.
Everybody
was
that really shocked.
And people were stealing them.
They stole all the, and within days, they disappeared across the
Like who does that? And why did they do that? And where are the antlers?
Talk about a mystery. Where are the antlers?
Right.
So I always wondered why they all disappeared.
This winter,
Were any of them sacrificed?
learn the truth
They're kind of freaky.
about what happened
Actually, what happened to the antlers?
to the antlers.
Oh my god.
Only on Quibi. 43.5 of the 115 sets of antlers were stolen in the first month that the moose were on the loose, and by the end of the summer that number would grow to 53. And then they started stealing entire mooses, or is it meese, or mises? Either way, by the end of August, between 4 and 8 went missing, never to be seen again. This is one of the few that still has a full wrap, likely due to the fact that it's locked away in the Anna Care Center. Compass Rose Moose, which was at the TD Center on the corner of Wellington and Bay, was stolen and restored twice in the summer of 2000. And while the moose is sadly gone, on the other side of the building there are now, coincidentally, large statues of cows laying down in the grass. It's pretty great. All of this moose crime led to some pretty amazing things happening at City Hall. Mel Lastman and the Chief of Police joined forces to, quote, fight moose vandalism. They launched a 24/7 Moose Watch hotline where you could call in to report what they called moose molestation, as well as an unofficial moose patrol.
A couple times people come by and knock this thing over, and it's easy to put back up, but you know, some people are jealous and
called the Save a Moose hotline.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like cow tipping, but for moose, yeah. One man was arrested in June after what the Star dubbed a moose mauling spree. He was fined $5,000 and faced up to 5 years in prison, though I was unable to find out if he actually served any hard time for his so-called moose molestation. Not my words. The police say he was easy to spot because he was the only guy carrying around antlers. Awesome. Soon, a fan-led moose surveilling website was launched called AntlerWatch.com. Unfortunately, the website is now offline, but the URL does weirdly redirect to the XE currency conversion website. This is because they were both actually founded by the same guy, Stephen Dengler. Here he is, back in the day with his fellow so-called moose guardians.
That's an oldie, but a goodie. In the early days of the internet, you could just have a funny idea and want to have a kind of, I won't say juvenile, but lighthearted take on something that was happening, right?
After having seen a bunch of the antlers go missing, Steve and a couple of his friends came up with the idea to put together a website that would track all of the moose, and it quickly took off.
While we were poking fun at the moose, we were also kind of like an unofficial PR arm for the moose. The media started looking for people to talk about the moose, and there we were. Like, we're not official spokesmen for the Moose Project, but we have a webpage up, we have pictures of the moose, people are writing in, and so we sort of became like the unofficial voice.
When the Antler Watch was active, you could use it to report on the status of any individual moose, aiming to catch any would-be moose molesters. Again, really not my choice of words.
It was just an attempt to be a humorous, public-facing aspect of the Moose Project, and I think actually in the scope of what we sort of dreamed up in the tavern, it grossly exceeded our expectations.
It's a pretty awesome website, and they had really hilarious shorthand, like if a moose was stolen, they'd write TML, or Total Moose Loss, or if it was restored, they'd write TMR, Total Moose Restoration.
Oh, that was just us sitting at the Beverly Tavern over beers, just laughing.
Here's one of my favorite updates from Antler Watch about the Canada's first ambulance moose at the Second City. June 6th, 2000. Total carnage. Both antlers missing, along with chair, first aid kit, and beaver. Huge hole punched in neck. This moose could use some first aid himself. P.S. A desperate plea from the moose. Have you seen my beaver? It's like peak early internet. Though being adorable internet vigilantes, they didn't get everything right, and they did often misreport some moose as missing. Like the iMoose, which Antler Watch reported as having gone missing from Nathan Phillips Square on June 1st, only to resurface 2 days later on Hazelton in Yorkville. But the actual moose book lists 18 Hazelton as its official address, meaning that it was probably moved there by the city after a brief stint downtown. The city would continue to replace these stolen antlers over and over again, slowly eating into their charitable earnings, presumably driving Mel Lastman insane, before eventually giving up. Growing up, I loved the moose. I was 9 at the time, and it felt so cool to see these wacky moose statues just scattered randomly throughout the city. And today, I love them even more because there's so few left, it's like a if you know scavenger hunt. But I have clear memories of adults in my life as a child that were very anti-moose. And looking through the archives, I was surprised to learn that they weren't alone.
Some of them were kind of garish and ugly.
My grandparents or neighbors would be like, oh, I'm over it.
Were you saying some of the moose were ugly?
Yeah.
These moose were weirdly divisive.
There was definitely a split in the people I worked with, whether they liked them or not.
I really like the moose statues. I think even my mom was a huge fan of the moose statues.
So a lot of people thought they were in bad taste, but that wasn't the point.
My parents did like the moose. I don't think they were as excited about them as my sister and I, who were like, oh my gosh, this is such a big deal.
It was really divided, 100%.
I grew up in the country, so we would like venture to Toronto, and me and my brother, it would be like our activity to come downtown and be like, oh, did you see the moose? There's a moose. I spotted another one.
I think we were all pretty young and hip at that time, so I think we all thought they were kind of dumb.
The Toronto Star ran a poll when the moose were first announced, but before any of them were actually put in, and 68% of respondents were opposed to the moose statues. That's over 2/3 of people strongly opposed to fun statues of moose with not at all anatomically correct hooves. Yeah, for some reason they gave them horse hooves instead of these split toe hooves that moose actually have. They're ungulates, not... What's a horse? A horse?
I don't know, I love the moose because when I moved here, obviously like it's very scary, go to a new place, you don't speak the language, but just having that kind of whimsical and like it was kind of inviting and just like, oh, it's like, it's not super serious.
Did people maybe just not like Mel Lastman and they were like, you know what, we hate anything to do with him?
I think there were some that were like purple, if I'm correct. Purple moose just doesn't work for me.
No. But 3 months later, after the moose were out and about, the Star ran the same poll, and the moose's approval rating had shot up to 53.5%. That's a huge increase, but still such a comical divide for a cute, fun, moose-based project.
You know what the moose sort of remind me of now? It's like a good corny joke. It's like everybody gets to groan at the end. They're like, oh yeah, it's so silly, it's so funny.
Right. The Toronto Star was pretty mean about the whole moose project. One reporter called Mel a civic huckster, and another one called him a moose's ass. They also go on to imply that the Moose Project would somehow destroy Toronto as we know it, which, yeah. But they weren't alone. Take a look at some of these emails that were sent to Antler Watch. Subject, these stupid f***ing moose. Ha 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 ha. P.S. The moose suck. Subject, hunting season. Dear Antler Watch, I want to know when the hunting season will begin. These moose are so ugly that I would like to shoot them down. Thanks. Bit threatening, but okay.
What I like best about that is the clear implication that I'm somehow responsible for putting the moose up.
Subject, moose suck. Frankly, I'm with the moose vandals on this issue. The moose are an annoying and unoriginal stunt. When city services such as transit are neglected and underfunded, silly fiberglass moose seems somewhat frivolous. My favorite moose? The one in Little Italy. It's covered in dog shit. The moose suck, and you suck for giving a damn.
Anytime you do anything that's interesting or in the public eye, you're just going to get a certain number of people that complain about it.
Despite the fact that the moose were funded by corporations and not the city, one of the most salient criticisms of the project was that instead of spending money on moose statues, they should give the money to people experiencing homelessness. The best illustration of this critique came in statue form from a local artist's collaboration with the Daily Bread Food Bank. They created a hungry or homeless moose with a shrunken ribcage and moved it to different spots around the city to raise awareness about hunger in Toronto. But the most common criticism I've found about it is, well, let me just read you what the Star wrote about it. First, there is the crassly commercial nature of the project. Anyone who looks a little closer will immediately see that the moose add up to little more than a huge advertising campaign. Just another way to sell out the city to corporate interests and remind us who's really in control. To try and pass off corporate advertisement as public art is disingenuous, dishonest, and dumb. So, I asked one of the artists who designed several of these moose about this criticism.
I did a couple of corporate pieces, and I didn't have to talk to anybody. It was what I wanted to do.
Yeah, you didn't put logos,
no,
did you?
There were no logos on any of the moose. I did something for Ernst & Young. I think I did something for one of the banks. They did actually a workshop for employees, and we went up north to a hotel, and the moose was up there in the room, and the employees came and we all decorated the moose together.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen some moose with logos, so I don't think that there was no corporate advertisements, but I've gone through the book several times, and I've only found about 7 of the over 300 moose that I would consider as blatant corporate advertising.
I know there were some people that thought it wasn't fine art, but that wasn't the point. Okay, the people in the galleries with their noses in the air may have said, okay, it's not real art, it's not. But that, who cares? No, yeah. We didn't ever think it was.
It probably didn't help the corpo criticisms that the moose Mel chose to ride at his announcement had the Labatt's logo on it, albeit faintly. Throughout the summer, more moose were unveiled. One batch was escorted under armed guard to police HQ for some reason, while another was raced up Cumberland in a moose parade. Getting a bit close to the Chicago thing, aren't we?
These cows are utterly delightful.
The moose that were auctioned off or stolen have since traveled far and wide. Like this Mountie moose, which shockingly still has its antlers, was at the CN Tower, but now lives in Muskoka, closer to its real-life counterparts. Except this one's at a gas station, where I paid, I kid you not, $30 for an absolutely terrible Subway sandwich. They did not sponsor this episode, or the Moose Project. The furthest moose that I've been able to track down is here in Bermuda, which I was lucky enough to... No, I could not afford to go. But here it is on Google Maps. I would have loved to have been on the plane that took it there. Mel ended up bringing one of the moose statues to Australia to pitch the Australian Olympic Committee on having Toronto host the 2008 Games. He wasn't successful, but it was probably the first moose in Australia, albeit one made of fiberglass. And I don't think they've seen one since.
I think 25 years later, this would be a great project to redo, relive, and we need it.
Yeah.
With what's going on in the world today, this is a good wake-up call for simplicity, for fun, no agenda, just, hey, look at that. Yeah. What is it? It's whatever you want it to be.
All these years later, I still love the moose. Yeah, a lot of them were tacky, but it's just such a fun and weird project for a city to take on, and I'm totally here for it. This one gets dressed up in different outfits all the time by the lovely people at IntegraCare. It's great.
I think it was necessary. We needed to bring the city together. The country was, going through whatever was going through. We were always going through something. And it was a good talking point. It was a silly project, but it was fun. I mean, I know we keep repeating it, but that's what it was.
You know what? I think it was fun. It gave somebody something to talk about. It changed the landscape of Toronto for a while because, you know, it kind of looks the same all the time. It made you happy every time you saw a colored moose. What's wrong with that?
I'm very glad that it was a thing. It is a core memory for me growing up in and around the city.
It's important in a way where like you feel that you're in a place. I think sometimes when you feel like separated from the city is because it looks all the same as any other city, but it's kind of having a bit of identity, even if it's something like an art project.
I remember loving the different kinds of artwork. Like I remember loving that each one was so unique and individual, and hearing that they're all by a variety of artists, like both established and non-established. I kind of love that a little bit, you know, that there's such a mix.
There was no meaning to it other than, you know, hey, look at that. It's gorgeous. It's great. It's a conversation piece. You've never seen like it before, and you've never seen anything like it since. So maybe it's time to do it again.
One of the moose artists, Charles Pachter, who was already quite famous in the moose art scene for his painting of the Queen riding a moose, among many others, was quoted in the Star saying, "There's something special about it that's mystical. It's about mooseness. Think about that, the essence of mooseness." I will, Charles. I will. Sadly, the majority of the moose have gone extinct. There is a Wikipedia page that was tracking them at one point, but it's quite out of date.
Where are they? That's a good question. And where did they go? And we should find them.
We should.
We should find them. Dig them up. Hopefully they're not buried.
This one is the Excalibur moose, and it lives on the east side of the Enercare Center. It's also probably the fanciest moose due to the fact that it's the only one that has a crown. That's all I know about high culture, is that if you're fancy, you wear a crown. Or a bolo. Are bolos fancy? If you know where any of the other moose statues have ended up, please let me know in the comments. I would love to see more of them. I painstakingly went through the Wayback Machine and transmitted it to a Google Sheet with every single one with all their locations.
This project is still getting volunteer hours decades afterwards. You've joined the Antler Watch team. You are not an unofficial Antler Watcher. You're an official Antler Watcher now. You're putting in volunteer hours. Welcome. You're the 4th Antler Watcher.
While most of the moose are sadly gone, we do have a bit of a spiritual successor to the Moose in the City project. It's these bell boxes, which, if you're not from Toronto, are like telecom boxes that hold, I don't know, telecom stuff, and were super ugly until they started getting artists to paint them. Ian did this one. It's just north of Yonge and Eglinton on Roselawn if you're in the area and you want to see some of Toronto's icons, like the raccoon, which I am working on a video about how the raccoon took over Toronto. So be sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss it. So I just got to one of my final moose locations, only to find out that sadly, it's been quite recently ripped out. But hey, at least they got one of the painted bell boxes. Unfortunately, the moose that was living at the Metro Toronto Convention Center until as recently as 2023 has been taken out or moved into storage or destroyed altogether. Fortunately, we do have this sort of successor to the Moose project in the form of these 2 giant pileated woodpecker statues. They're pretty sweet. I should also mention that there are a bunch of other moose just scattered around Toronto, like this one, that are not actually part of the Moose in the City project. I thought they were for years, but when I went through the book, I noticed that none of the positioning of the Moose in the City moose's legs matched the positioning of these road moose. So yeah, Toronto is even more moose-filled than I previously thought. I think it's high time for a new Toronto-wide animal-based statue project. But we should leave the moose in the aughts and instead build giant statues of 2024's most beloved Torontonian animal, the once reviled and now adored trash panda. This is a call on Mayor Chow to break ground on raccoons in the city and make Toronto slightly weird again. Would it solve the housing crisis? Absolutely not. Would it help with grocery prices? Hell no. But would it be kind of fun to see giant statues of raccoons all over the place? Yes. Yes, it would. Oh, looks like they've already started. So what should I talk about next? Please let me know in the comments, and if you like this sort of thing, please consider subscribing. If you'd like to buy a copy of the Moose book, they're $25 each with the proceeds going to charity. Just go to incredibleprinting.com and send a message to Mendl or Nicole. As I mentioned in my video last week, I'm no longer producing Animal Logic, and I'll be uploading videos here a lot more often. I'm really excited to embark on this new chapter in my life, and I really hope that you'll follow along. Also, if you want to watch the full interview with Mendl and Ian, it's a lot of fun and it's up on my Patreon right now. If you're interested and capable of supporting me, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. Not what I'm looking for, but okay.